This panel is proudly sponsored by Voodle.
Welcome back to Running Remote Online. My name is Danny Page. It's hard to believe we've been doing this for 12 hours. How about another 12 hours, Travis? He's our director for stage one here in the background, but I think Travis is probably going to pass. But we certainly saved some of the best for last today. It is a bold statement to make, right? Digital nomad is not dead, and we have some of the best thinkers in the space here to speak on this panel. Now, Rachel Lanham from Voodle, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a moment, but you are our panel sponsor. So I want to speak from the heart about Voodle, if that's okay. Now, we had the CEO of Voodle on the Running Remote podcast, which of course I host, and that episode will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And what the tagline is that Voodle is the asynchronous short video platform purpose-built for distributed teams. Now, what does that really mean? As Forrest said, Voodle is like TikTok for business. And what it is for me, Voodle can strengthen the social fibers that connect the individuals in your companies, okay? Companies making the transition, this software is perfect for you because Voodle, at the onset of the pandemic, made the transition. Forrest and his family, they became digital nomads. They built technology that supports businesses making this change. A Running Remote exclusive, 6 months free of Voodle Pro. Register at the booth. All right, Rachel, I'm going to hand it to you. And we're really looking forward to hearing this panel. Digital nomad, certainly not dead. I'll see you guys for questions in a little bit.
Thanks, Danny. Great introduction. Thanks for the Voodle shout outs. We appreciate it. And Voodle's completely free for anybody to try. Wanted to get started. I'm really excited to be running this panel or moderating it with this group of people. I've just in prep for this panel have learned so much about all the ins and outs of what it truly means to live that digital nomad life. So I actually want to start, since you guys know the topic, really start with the team here and have each of you guys introduce yourself and your company and how it fits into the landscape of solutions that, you know, kind of enable this digital nomad future. And tell us one thing about living and working abroad that might be of interest to the audience. So I'll just call on names so nobody talks over each other. So I'll start with Dave. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm excited to be on this panel, so I'm really excited to get a chance to catch up with you guys. But yeah, my name's Dave Williams. I've been a digital entrepreneur now for like 25 years. I've started and sold multiple businesses. My first business was in the search engine marketing space, most recently in the social media space. And then my wife and I, after our last exit, we were based in New York City, and we traveled for basically 4 years as digital nomads, traveling the world. And that's what really sparked the idea for our business called NOMADX. Essentially, we are as an accommodation platform for digital nomads, and then wrapping that around community as well. We recently merged with a company called Flat.io based out of the Czech Republic. We at the time we had about 2,000 listings here in Portugal. We merged with Flat.io, so now we've got about 11,000 listings all throughout Europe in 18 different countries, and then we're in the process of expanding to multiple other locations all throughout Europe is the focus. We also are the exclusive strategic partner for the Digital Nomads Madeira initiative, which has been a big initiative, which was launched by Gonzalo Hall and with the government of the Madeira Island. And that's been a big project for us recently. And as we go forward, we really see NOMADX, the brand, is much more of a community first business with a remote first business model. And I'm very involved as well, not only with NOMADX, I'm an ambassador with Flat.io, with Nomads Giving Back, and then also an global ambassador for the Digital Nomads Madeira Island initiative, which we plan on expanding pretty significantly. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest benefit really is just to take advantage of the places that you go to and make sure you go on some epic adventures. So I try and build one epic adventure into every trip. So whether it's here in Portugal, you know, going out on a jet ski in Nazaré on the waves, for example, or hiking Kilimanjaro or just doing really epic things while you're traveling. Because I feel like a lot of nomads get stuck and just end up working all the time and miss out on some really epic things. So you take the time off and you'll be much better at your work and you'll have many more experiences as well, which I think is the remote year. I think you guys probably do a great job at introducing that to the nomads, but I think that's a big miss for a lot of them.
That's great. Well, let's head it over to Sam, since you just brought up remote year.
Yeah, hey everyone, and thanks for having me. My name's Sam Pessin. I'm one of the two founders of Remote Year. We started the company about 6.5 years ago, and it's really predicated on this movement toward remote work, and also the fact that people want to see the world and they want to use that remote work to do more than just sit in their house or sit in their basement and work against a wall. So fundamentally, I think this program really changes lives and improves the way that people perceive and approach the world. It's sort of an end-to-end hospitality experience. You pay one price, and Remote Year organizes everything from housing, co-working space, travel between the cities, experiences on the ground, and full-time staff to support you along the way. And so it's been just an amazing journey to be on. Been exposed to thousands of people doing the program and staff helping us run the programs. And excited to talk a little more about the remote work and digital nomad movement today. Oh, and the thing that people, well, this might not be something that people don't know, but it's always a little bit of a gamble when you're going and traveling around the world to find reliable and good Wi-Fi for work. So I think having some kind of a process, whether it's a platform like Remote Year, and there's many other platforms out there as well, to just make sure that when you land and when you get there on a Sunday night before your Monday work day, that you just feel confident and set up for success from a work perspective, so that you can go enjoy your epic adventures, like Dave said.
Awesome. David?
Hi, my name is David McKeegan. I'm the co-founder of Greenback Expat Tax Services, and we prepare taxes for Americans that live outside the U.S. My wife and I co-founded the company back in 2009. At the time, we were living and working in London, both had finance jobs, and decided that with the whole global financial crisis, it was a good time to take a year out of banking and try something new. So we started the company. We moved to Brazil for a couple months while we got it up and going, and we haven't looked back. We've lived all over the world at this point. We have 3 kids. Each of them was born on a different continent. And I think really the enjoyable thing for me at this stage is traveling the world with the kids and seeing the excitement, or just seeing everything new again through their eyes. That's really fun.
Awesome. Well, I am Rachel Lanham, as Danny told. I'm from Voodle. I'm the Chief Customer Officer. I personally am not a digital nomad yet, but my kids are teenagers, and my husband and I are looking forward to nomading out pretty soon. So it's just great to learn from all of these experts. And David, when we were talking before, you mentioned that your kids each have 2 or 3 passports each because of where they were born and where you guys are from. And so we were kidding, you guys were like the Jason Bourne family with all many passports. And I think that's, kind of living the dream. So this panel is, that really brings all this great expertise. We know that, kind of the future is hybrid. We're not putting the genie back in the bottle. People have experienced this flexibility. We just put out a big research report on the hybrid workplace, and just like every other survey you've probably seen recently, we found that only 11% of knowledge workers want to go back to the office full time. So we want to help individuals as well as companies with this panel of understanding how to kind of move into this new future. So I thought a great place to start is really to start at the highest level and hear from the panel what your predictions are for Digital Nomad 2022, which is the title of this discussion. What are your predictions? What big trends do you think that we're going to see that both individuals and companies need to prepare themselves for? So I'll just start with Dave just to call on you and get it going. I'll let everybody answer this question. And then once we get through that, if there's anything to add, I'll spark that as well.
Sure thing. I think at the moment, what I'm really seeing is what we saw at the beginning of this whole movement, which has really been, I'd say, over the last 4, 5, 6 years, maybe right when remote year got started, I think is really when this movement really started to take off. But we've seen so far, it's very much been a very early adopter market. So as much as you read about it in the press and you read all these stories, the reality is much different. So the market's actually been very, very small. So that was like that was kind of a harsh reality for us when we started our company, just realizing that it's a very, very small community of digital nomads up until this point. And so if you say, digital nomad is dead, yes, I'd say it is dead at the moment, although there are nomads out there. People are experiencing more of a local digital nomad lifestyle at the moment. There are some people traveling globally, but it's very, very difficult at the moment. So I think what we're heading into is really the 2.0. So digital nomadism 2.0, and we're going to start seeing is all these local nomads or local remote workers looking to experiment with this lifestyle, whether that's for a month or 2 months. Instead of going on holiday for a week or two, they go on holiday for a month and they get a co-working space and they live and work in a location, and then also take time off for some of these epic adventures and things like that. We're also seeing real focus around sustainability. So I think this next generation of digital nomads, they're very focused on supporting sustainable organizations. And there's been a lot of negative press recently about Airbnb, any sort of hidden charges. They're very focused around affordability. They're very much into the minimalistic movement. It's very much a do-it-yourself type customer. Has been the historic digital nomad, but I think as we go forward, the profile for the customer, I'm sure, is going to fit very nicely with the remote year business model, because we're seeing a lot more professionals, people that want the support network. So we're really going to see, I think, this nomadism 2.0. We're going to start to see also movement out of the city, which we've already started to see. So if you take a look at a lot of the top digital nomad locations, they've been top digital nomad cities around the world. Now we're starting to see as new types of locations emerge, where the nomads don't feel they have to go to the city to be around other people, but they want to go to destinations where they can network with locals, network with other digital nomads, but in a smaller setting. So we're seeing island destinations, small villages like the Nomad Madeira Island initiative that are emerging. There's a lot of interest and a real focus around community and connection. So not that wasn't an issue before, but I think now so more than ever, as people have been sitting at home and they're looking for inspiration too. So they're looking to do things like, go on a spiritual journey, or, do micro dosing, or head into the mountains on the weekends, or even during the evenings. Like, they want to be able to get away and experience nature. So they're really looking to get much more back into nature. And then we have all these newbies that are coming out. So the 1.0, these new nomads, that are kind of experiencing this for the first time. And so I think, for them, it's kind of a new experience, but there's a lot more infrastructure around it now, whether it's through accommodations, programs like Remote Year and other programs that exist out there to make this lifestyle a lot easier. I'd say that the nomadism 1.0 is a very difficult lifestyle to live on your own. Now it's going to be getting much easier with all the services and everything that's available out there these days.
Yeah, since you brought up Remote Year again, I might kick it over to Sam. And what is the 2.0 as we move into, kind of digital nomadism 2022? How are, you thinking about it personally as well as at the company?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Dave just said. I agree that the market was smaller than people thought pre-COVID. However, I think two sort of explosions have happened. I mean, one is the obvious one, which is remote work, but the other one that's starting to happen now is a travel explosion. We are seeing the last couple of months demand for remote year programs, and speaking to some of my peers in the industry as well, they are as well that are at levels above pre-COVID, just in terms of people's interest in programs and wanting to get out there and travel. And I still think we're just at sort of the beginning to mid-level of that sort of, let's say, resuming of travel demand. There's still a lot of people that are nervous. There's still a lot of people that are not yet vaccinated. There's still a lot of places that you can't go, depending on where you're from and where you're trying to go. So I think, based on what we're seeing, it feels like going into the next 6 to 12 months is it's gonna be a really exciting time to see what the world does with their new remote work abilities and flexibility. So, I think that's all really exciting. Some things that we're seeing that I think are interesting. There's a lot more last minute planning, as you could probably imagine. I think that's driven by the fact that people, first of all, don't have as many things going on as they used to. And also just by the fact that they want to make sure that the places that they want to go are actually possible, and regulations and COVID stuff is not, rapidly changing on the ground. Shorter commitments for sure. On average, people going for a couple of weeks or a month rather than a year, let's say. And I think the last thing that is certainly a bigger focus is health and safety. I think every digital nomad or remote worker that was somewhere around the world, 12 months ago, or 14 months ago at this point, was caught in a pretty tough situation and either found it difficult to get home or difficult to find, healthcare that they needed depending on the circumstances. And so I think an extra focus on good travel insurance, good health and safety services and support at a global level is going to continue to be a need well into the future of remote work and travel.
Yeah, interesting. And I love how you brought up that, usually when there's a big shift, it's like you're riding some wave. And in this case, there's two waves that are being ridden: the big remote work shift and this, what COVID, kind of created this big experiment where all of a sudden everybody had to work remotely and we found out it was productive. And then the other wave is really this increased demand in travel, just because that was a long-term trend. And then obviously we've been deprived. And so there's all this pent-up demand. So two big waves to catch is really interesting. David, what do you have to add in terms of kind of your overall predictions and themes for Digital Nomad 2022?
Well, I think when I first heard the phrase, it tended to be a lot of younger guys, early 20s, just out of college doing, some odd jobs on the internet kind of thing. And what I see now is professional people, guys with 15, 20 years experience, people with families, men and women running businesses globally in ways that, it just wasn't possible 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The little town we live in Costa Rica has two co-working sites being built right now because there's so much demand for people to get out of the US, get out of Canada, and go somewhere else for a month or 2 months or a year or anything like that. And it's not just single people, it's married couples, it's people with kids. And I think as that becomes more normal, as people see that happening more and more, the market's just going to continue to expand and continue to grow and continue to need companies that cater to those folks as well.
Yeah. Great. Anybody to add on the trends? It was just sparking from what everybody was just saying. It's like, it's kind of here to stay. We know it's happening. We know it's going to be growing and shifting from something that was like, maybe you heard about a lot, but wasn't as, everywhere as maybe people thought it was, to something that's a much bigger opportunity. So as we move there, I started thinking about, well, what are the top challenges? But before we shift to that, anything to add across you three in terms of the kind of the 2.0 and what that's going to look like? Great. All right.
I think the demographic what David hit on is definitely going to be huge. I mean, I think initially what we saw is 25 to 35 is a big demographic, 35 to 45. We're starting to see a big bump in the 45 to 55 segment. And we're starting to see it a lot older, some older people, as well as even a younger segment, like 18 to 25 is starting to pick up. But I think, a lot of the nomads, I think there's a misconception, like David's perspective a bit, I think is a bit of a misconception, because I feel like a lot of the nomads kind of get put into this bucket of just being on the beaches and kind of screwing around, or younger employees, but that really hasn't been the situation. A lot of the nomads out there tend to be in their mid-30s. They tend to be very professional. They tend to, be very, very responsible with their time and how they work. So there's this huge misperception in the industry about digital nomads, almost a label of digital nomads being a bad word for the digital nomads. They don't want to be called digital nomads because it has this bad perception. They want to be called location independent or global citizens or who knows what. So
that's why I keep saying remote working professionals. Trying to be careful with my words, but I mean, I'll just third everything you guys said. I mean, our average age actually has gone up by about 4 years this year. So we went from about 31 to 35 in terms of our average. And 70% of the people who are doing our programs are full-time employees of a company. That used to be closer to 50%. So I think, you know, shifting into the direction that both Dave and David just mentioned is exactly what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, just more professional. It's not what you think where it's this young freelancer who's hanging out on the beach. Really interesting. Well, as we agree, this is a big opportunity. It's the future of work. Let's kind of look at the other side of the coin. What are the kind of top challenges that you see for digital nomads and the companies that employ them? Like what are, you know, it's not all, you know, unicorns and rainbows. There's a darker side that I think should be spoken about. Sam, maybe just you were just talking, so I'll just let you continue. What are some of those challenges that you see?
I mean, I think I'll hit both sides for the people who are traveling and working remotely. The main one I think is just loneliness and community. It is sort of the number one thing that can be challenging, especially if you're doing it on your own, to sort of find the people that you're looking for and get out there and you know, meet locals and meet friends and meet other travelers. And I think for the people who are working remotely at home right now and have been doing so for over a year, you know, even more so the case, right? I think everyone's feeling that fatigue and feeling like they need community. However, the community that's filling that need now is not always your coworkers. You know, it's partly your coworkers, it's partly, you know, the other people around you in your community. You're spending a lot more of your time with right now people in your home. You know, for the folks who are traveling, people locally with them or in their co-working space. So I think the communities that you're spending the majority of your time with are actually changing. But I think loneliness is really the main issue. I actually think beyond that, there's not that many major challenges that remote workers have as they start to travel the world. It's, you know, I think a lot more of the leverage is actually on the employee side right now. Yeah. For companies, on the other hand, I think there's a number of challenges. You know, I think a lot of the big companies are moving to hybrid models, and I think hybrid is probably the hardest to make work, in my opinion. I think fully remote is relatively straightforward. I think fully in person is relatively straightforward. I think hybrid is really hard. You know, I know we've all been that person on a group meeting where there's 5 people in the room and 1 or 2 people dialed in, and you're one of those 2 people. It's just hard. I mean, no matter what technology tool you use, if you have an owl or anything else that sort of, you know, makes it feel like you're in the room, it's really just, I think the hybrid models are really challenging, and to sort of get the balance right between what communications touch points everybody is a part of versus just the people who are remote or in person, and, you know, how do people interface and interact? Like, for example, really early on in Remote Year's journey, we literally had that problem. We had 5 people in a room, and we had 2 people, you know, helping us figure out the next city that everybody was going to and start to build out the operations there. And, you know, we had them dialed in on a WhatsApp call with the phone in the middle of the room. And, you know, after a few meetings, they called me and they were like, I can't participate in this meeting. This is too difficult. And so we created a rule that we called the all or nothing rule, which meant when any meeting happened, either everybody was on video on their own computer or everybody was in the room. And so, you know, we all basically ended up sitting around a table on our own computers, on our own screens, playing the mute game, and, you know, sort of being on even playing field so that everybody had sort of an equal voice at the table. So that's just an example of a policy that we made. But I think those types of you know, rules and operating norms at companies are, again, they're hard to get right when you're in a hybrid model. I think the other thing that for the companies who have decided to like temporarily or permanently go fully remote, you know, in-person interaction is still very important, and I don't think anything will ever replace that. So, you know, companies that are fully remote, if you don't see your coworkers for 5 years and you're working together, I think that's an issue, right? I'm a big believer in high intensity, low frequency in-person touch points, whether it's a company retreat or, you know, a leadership strategic planning session, to really get everybody in a room together. It could be literally 2 days, could be a week, but somewhere in that range. And I think there's a big opportunity for these companies to take advantage of that. I think that's sort of my version of remote work, and how we do it at Remote Year is, you bring everybody together for strategic planning, and then for 3 months or 6 months, you're like in operating mode basically, and that's what you do remotely. And I think that structure works well for us, and I think could work well for a lot of companies. But I think there's a big opportunity for not only companies, but retreat providers and other organizations to sort of provide those services to companies that need the help.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the hybrid. I mean, in some ways, I think the real world was hybrid before COVID. You weren't all, unless you were a very small company, you really weren't all in the same room typically. Either you were on different floors or across a campus or in different cities. I mean, the work has become more distributed. But I think the great thing is that now that everybody had to work remotely for a period of time, there's a great sympathy and empathy for those people that were the person on the phone that felt ignored. And so I think we can at least face those challenges head on with some empathy. David, what do you have to add to what Sam laid out in terms of some of the challenges as for digital nomads or the companies that employ them?
Sure. I think one of the things we're hearing from a lot of different companies right now is the biggest problem they have with remote is training people and getting them up to speed so they're performing quickly. A lot of that kind of work would happen with one employee sitting next to another employee for a period of time, basically learning through osmosis or asking questions as they're going through and doing things. So my theory or my guess is that for the next couple of years, while people learn how to train and learn how to onboard people remotely, you're going to see a lot more people who are sort of in the middle be able to go fully remote. So it's not the person who just joined the company that has 0 to 1 or 2 years experience. It's going to be the person with 2 or 3 years experience, up to 10 years experience. And then at the 10 years of experience point, they'll probably have to go back to the office to do the training for the new people coming into the company. That's just anecdotally what I've heard from a couple different companies that I've spoken with. I think, for the individuals, one of the biggest challenges we've had in our business, and our business is 100% remote. We don't have an office anywhere in the world. But one of the biggest challenges we've had is people working too much. So, when you get up in the morning, you shower, you put on a suit and tie, you commute to the office, you're sort of training yourself, okay, when I get there, my brain goes on for work, and I'm going to do that for 8 hours or however long you're there. Then you pack up your desk at the end of the day, you grab your coat, you commute on home, and that gives your brain some time to go into like the slow down mode or just to transition from work mode to home mode. What happens with a lot of people that we've seen when they start working from home, they just have their computer up on their kitchen table, or they're not set up in the same way they would be if they were going to an office. And so they end up checking in all the time throughout the day. So they go from working a normal 8-hour day to working a 12 or 14-hour day just because they check every time they walk by their computer. So I think that can lead to burnout, that can lead to being unhappy in your role and things like that. And so I think that's something that the individual needs to watch out for. Make sure you have yourself set up to work properly. Make sure you have a start and an end to your day. Make sure that you're not just working all day, 7 days a week, just because you think, hey, my computer's right there, I'll just do another 5 minutes, or I'll just check in, or that kind of thing. Try and be efficient with your time, because a big part of it is enjoying your life while you're abroad. For a long time, we lived in Bali, Indonesia, and I joke with people saying, I work in an office all day long, but I get to spend every weekend in Bali. You want to get out. You want to be able to have that fun, have those experiences. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, you need time for the epic adventures.
Right.
Dave, anything to pile on to those challenges that were laid out by David and Sam?
I mean, I think it's the nomad lifestyle is not so easy. So I think that's one of the main realizations. Is a lot of people go into it thinking they're going to be able to live this lifestyle, no problem. They run out of money. You know, they don't have the discipline to sustain the lifestyle. You know, I think a lot of people don't like working at the corporation. So I think to some extent, they're looking at this as an opportunity to maybe transition and start, you know, their own little side hustles and eventually be their own entrepreneurs. And whether that starts off as more of a gig worker versus a corporate employee, that's what I see a lot of the nomads really wanting to be, to have the time and the flexibility and get paid for the work done versus being tied to a corporation, tied to meetings, all this stuff. It really, really goes against the lifestyle, like having to go into the office. Like you talk to the digital nomads, they don't even want to go to the office for a meeting. A lot of them, you know, they've just gotten into this mode of just not being in the office. Like going to the office, just getting into a co-working space for a few hours can be difficult sometimes for meetings because they're such free spirited. They tend to want to just be doing their own thing. They don't want to necessarily be working for a startup and having to work 14 and 15 hours a day. You know, they're on this life journey. They want to work, you know, 6 hours a day ideally, but get paid for 8 and work 4 days a week instead of 5. You know, that's kind of the mentality of a lot of the nomads. Not to say they're not great workers, because they basically want to do more work in less time, get paid for it, and be able to live the journey. And that doesn't mean that they're not working all the time, because they are on their screens all the time. So you've got to figure, as a nomad, you're living on your screen. So that makes it really, really difficult for them, because they're always behind their screens. They're in their apartments. They're in a co-working space. You know, it's hard for them to really get away from all of this. I think with this new kind of 2.0 and people getting out more into nature and away from the cities, we're going to see things change quite a bit. But I think at the moment, it's not such an easy lifestyle. And I think it's a very difficult transition for someone who's used to working in the office or even used to working from home. All of a sudden, sending them out in the road, they've got to now do their job. They want to live this, you know, live this lifestyle of freedom. And a lot of times it kicks them in the ass. They have to go home, they have to regroup and get back on track. You know, sometimes economically it doesn't work out for them, you know, or they go out and test the program through remote year and they decide they just want to transition and do it on their own. They don't want to go back to the corporation. So I think that's a lot of what we see is these real independent, they don't want to be marketed to, they don't want to be sold to, you know, these are very, very independent people, and they want to, this is a life journey that they're on that they may not do forever. So we see we see it as a massive trend in the industry. It's going to be huge, but it doesn't come without its challenges, like the loneliness and other things that you guys mentioned as well, because as you move to a new city, you're always having to meet new people, get reacclimated. And that can be awesome, because then when you come back to that city, all of a sudden you know a bunch of people. But when you first move there, you're trying to meet people, you're trying to get your work done, you know, and that can take you a month or two sometimes.
Yeah, I think maybe like the expectations might be like, oh, it's so glamorous. And, you know, then you get, like you said, kind of smacked in the face with the realities of like, oh, it's difficult. And it takes a lot of emotional effort to get to know new people or even stay engaged in work when it's just a screen. So that's kind of segues well into our next big topic, which is around, you know, sounds boring, infrastructure, but what kind of tools and things need to be in place so to overcome those challenges. The challenges are real. We've already talked about the great benefit, and we know that it's happening. We know there's challenges. What needs to be in place to ensure success? I think, again, both for the individuals and the companies, to overcome the challenges and really get the best of, you know, what kind of digital nomad and remote work can provide. Jump ball. Okay, I'll hit David first.
Sure. You know, I don't think you need a whole lot of kit to make this work. You know, for a while when we first started, you know, our location independent journey, we limited ourselves to 100 items. And the reason we did that was because we wanted to be able to travel lightly if we wanted to change locations and things like that. You know, obviously you need access to internet, you need access to a good computer, a headset, you know, all these kinds of things. That can be challenging in a lot of different places. Yeah, I think from the individual standpoint, you're going to run into a lot of new problems that you haven't faced before. You know, an example in Costa Rica, you know, we constantly we lose internet for a couple hours. a couple times a week because a tree falls on the line somewhere in the country. Like, you don't even know where it happens. So, you have to get very good at overcoming these obstacles and working around and things like that. You want to have redundancies for things. You want to have, if you can't take the meeting on your computer because the internet's out, you want to make sure you can take it on your phone, things like that. I think some of the other obstacles that people run into or they're going to face for the first time, just specifically from one that we see from the tax perspective, is all of a sudden you have new and interesting tax options in front of you. We were talking before the call about the foreign earned income exclusion, where you can exclude a big chunk of your income if you're living overseas, things like that. So there's just a whole lot of different things that you're going to have to get up this learning curve before you can settle into the life, living location independently or being a digital nomad.
Yeah. Dave, what do you have to add to that in terms of what kind of infrastructure and tools need to be in place to drive success?
Like what we've seen at the moment is there's a lot of countries out there announcing their new remote work or digital nomad visas. But what we see is that most of these visas really aren't catering to digital nomads. And so they're misnamed, I would say. Because generally most digital nomads from we see, they travel 1 to 6 months, most of them on average 2.5 to 3 months per location at a time. So they're not really looking to stay at a place for a year or 2 years. So we see a lot of these new programs not necessarily hitting the mark. I think really what nomads are looking for is community. They want to go to a place where they're going to find community. And so whether that's, the initiative we're doing on Madeira Island at Ponta do Sol, through NOMADX and through the Digital Nomads Madeira Island initiative, that's what they're looking for. And actually where they can participate in the community and actually make the community their own, where they're not necessarily getting compensated, but they have, their own little morning yoga sessions, their meditations, their group swims, they're going out to work out together. So it's more about, building community around specific locations and less about visas and other things. So that's what we're really seeing, I guess, in terms of like the, and events obviously are super important to the nomads. The technology infrastructure, like the infrastructure we have on Madeira Island, the Wi-Fi is super fast, where it's coming in at like a gigabyte versus where it was before when we came on the island. We're giving them access to free co-working spaces. We have a free Slack channel. So everyone's just like, the community is becoming so strong, and as people are there, they're all telling their friends to come visit as well. And so we've got, at the moment, I think there's about 1,400 digital nomads on Madeira Island with a backlog of 6,000 that have expressed interest. And this is just for one of the villages. So we're going to be expanding to multiple villages, all across the island in different places all throughout Portugal. So I think the infrastructure is super important. If the Wi-Fi is not good and the community is not there, and I think generally, like a lot of nomads, they might come in and they might be able to get a visa for 3 months, but it's really important for them, for US, like you're coming from the US to Europe, you can only stay in Europe really for like 3 months. That's not enough time. So I think Europe's got to really take a close look at that, allowing US residents to come over and spend more time in Europe. Otherwise, people are coming in, they're spending a month in, Germany, a month in Spain, and then they've got a month in Portugal, and then they got to get an extension. So, Portugal's got a really nice program here that allows the nomads to get an extension. It's kind of a loophole, but, people can stay an extra several, 3 to 6 months a lot of times. But yeah, and eventually they do want to end up and stay in some of these places. So that's where I think some of these expat visas come in handy, like the remote work visas, where you find a location like Portugal. For me, I traveled the world, went to all these amazing places. But at the end of the day, I fell in love with Portugal. So I ended up moving here. And I think that's what you're going to see a lot of with the digital nomads as well, is that as they travel the world, where they live isn't based on where they grew up or where they're working, but they're going to live where they feel like this is like their favorite place to live in the world and use it as a base camp for their travel. So for me, like I'm coming from the States, I wanted to spend more time in Europe. I wanted to be in Chamonix in the winters. I wanted to be in Austria in the winters to go snowboarding. I wanted to be at the beach in the summer, and I want to be in a place that's super affordable. So it's like my lifestyle. I can downgrade my lifestyle quite a bit, live off a lot. It doesn't cost me as much to live. And be in an amazing place where there's a lot of energy, especially around this whole digital nomad movement. So anyway, I think that's really the thing. And then trying to figure this whole thing out, I think from a tax perspective, like Like you guys are saying, it's not so simple. When you start dealing with the bureaucracies of these governments, that's when it becomes a nightmare. So as much as you can avoid dealing with the bureaucracy and just living off a tourist visa and figuring out these loopholes like you guys are talking about, you know, being able to travel and get these earned income exclusions. You know, some of these trips, I'm sure even remote year, you could maybe even write off the trip because maybe it's a business expense. So there's different things you can do to maybe take advantage of this new lifestyle, and understanding that maybe before you start your trip, because it can save you a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sam, I assume you agree with the kind of one of the main things people are looking for besides Wi-Fi is community. Anything to add to beyond what these guys have said?
Yeah, I mean, I always talk about the sort of remote work and travelers hierarchy of needs, and there's sort of three levels, right? Like there's the basic needs, and the foundational needs of a remote worker are Wi-Fi and comfortable accommodations. If you don't have those two things, then you're in a really tough spot. Those are sort of the basics. You know, the next layer in my mind, and this is mostly just from feedback we get from our customers, is community. So, you know, then how do you kind of bring that together into a bit more of a social experience? And there are kind of two sides of that. One side are the people that you meet who are traveling, the other travelers, and the other side are locals, which actually is usually the harder part to actually interface with and form connections with when you're working and traveling at the same time. And then, you know, the sort of top part of the hierarchy of needs are the experiences, these, you know, epic experiences that Dave was talking about before, and really forming the memories that will last you a lifetime. But you really have to kind of go up that ladder, and I think there's different services and different platforms that support each part of that in terms of serving the needs of this community.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we found in this report that we just put out is that I think it was something like 73% of the respondents said that the tools that, you know, the company had in place pre-pandemic, remote or hybrid, you know, aren't really keeping up with how they want to work today. They want things that are more purpose-built for this new way of working. You can't just like cut and paste like, oh, we had an in-person meeting, so now we're going to use Zoom and everything's fine. We'll just do the same exact thing. And when you look at that data for slice it for the younger, newer to career audience, you know, older Gen Z and younger millennials, it's even more like they really want tools that will fit their current lifestyle. And that can build that, you know, yes, you want to build your local community, you know, in the Madeira Islands or wherever it may be, but also the community of your coworkers. And how do you do that? What kind of infrastructure can be in place in order to help develop that? And, you know, get together every, you know, like I think you had a great phrase, high intensity, low frequency in-person touch points, but what happens in between that? And I think that's where the companies can play a role in terms of providing the tools beyond what the cities and countries can provide for the nomads. So really interesting stuff. Well, the final theme that came up when we were kind of prepping for this was really around culture. And our research showed that, you know, people are actually report being a lot more productive when they have close connections with their coworkers. And so that kind of comes down to the company culture and how you build trust. And so you guys all work for companies, or how, you know, your companies are, you know, pretty distributed. How, you know, maybe a tip as we're kind of getting closer to the, when Danny's going to join us. So maybe a tip from each of you on how you've been able to create a strong culture, despite the fact that you're not all in the same place at the same time with your team. And Sam, since you were just talking, I'll just have you start it off, and then Dave, and then David, just a tip on how you've been able to do that with your companies.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to something I said before, because I think it doesn't exactly answer your question, but I think that in-person interactions are still very, very important to that, especially early on. I think David mentioned earlier, like training and onboarding. During that phase, to have some way of you know, meeting in person and starting off on the right foot and sort of creating that connection. And then when you go remote, it's more of maintaining than building, if that makes sense, I think is a really powerful model. That said, obviously, even when you are remote for months and months on end, it still requires some effort. So it's not so innovative, but we spend 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of every meeting just socializing, basically, spending time talking about what happened yesterday, what happened over the weekend, try to just casually learn about what, the other person, because you just don't get that as much when you're on Zoom calls all day, unless you really, if you jump in at, 1 minute after the hour when everybody joins, then you sort of lose out on that, that kind of casual conversation about people's lives. And the other thing we do, we do some other small ones like, the Slack donut where it's a plugin where you sort of automatically meet somebody else on the team every week or two and do a one-on-one with them to get to know them. We've done sort of a team version of that where you sort of get together and ask one or two big questions and just debate and discuss and, get to know each other at a little bit of a deeper level in terms of, backgrounds and perspectives and what motivates people. So, I think at a high level, the way we've seen those be the most successful is when they're employee driven and empowering the people on our team. If I get up there and try to do something like that, it usually falls on its face. But if somebody who's passionate about something on the team, rallies the troops and gets everyone on a Zoom call to kick off something like that, it goes really well.
Great. Dave?
Oh, sure thing. Yeah, I think what all the younger generation especially is looking for at the moment is, companies that are more value-based, mission-based companies with very, very strong core values. They hire based on the core values. They fire based on the core values. I think you're only as good as your weakest player. So I think especially, even coming from the top where you see weaknesses in the organization, being quick to react to that and even letting people go, I think that carries a lot of respect because I think in a remote workforce, if they see people are slacking off, everyone else is going to start being demotivated. I think, also just by hiring really great leaders in the company is super important. And I found that out the hard way in my businesses in the past where we maybe didn't have the best leader and then the team members don't see a growth path and then they want more money or they're leaving for other opportunities. So I think, if you really make a good investment in having really strong leadership, then generally you're going to be able to keep your teams engaged much easier because I think this younger generation, they're all looking for people to help mentor them, become better at their jobs, become more valuable instead of just looking for, the next job opportunity. I also like to use equity incentives too. So I really look at my team members, as my business partners. So I always like to divide up the equity. So instead of starting a company with a business partner and everyone split it 50-50 or everyone gets 30%, I really look at the rest of the company as my other 50%. And I try and give, very, very aggressively to the team. And then if the team members don't work out, obviously I get rid of them, but really trying to create incentives to keep people around. And then doing really nice things for them. So that might be getting together like every 3 to 4 months, ideally, or a couple times a year. Ideally, every 4 months I found is really the best kind of rhythm for us. But kind of getting together, having strategy sessions, thinking high level, and then also just doing stuff that's really, really fun as a team and really getting to know each other and have those bonding moments. So then when you go back to the office, you've got a clear action plan for the next several months. You feel like you're very connected with the people at the office. And then I think along with, Sam was saying too, just to start the relationship, it's very much like a long distance relationship. And I know I've been in a long distance relationship before and it's really, really hard, because it's out of sight, out of mind. So it's kind of the same way in a professional relationship where you can have these long distance relationships, but it's super important for people to get together and still have that personal aspect of the relationship and feel that attachment to their job where it's not just a project, but it's actually like, there's some more meaning to it for them than just collecting a paycheck.
Yeah, I was listening to the chief people officer at Zillow talk about they've decided, Zillow's like a big real estate company in the US. They've decided to embrace hybrid, and he was saying, more than ever, we're investing in that first 90 days of people's experience. And then he's like, we always should have been doing that. But in this case, it's like an even, deeper focus on making sure that getting off on the right foot. And I keep hearing that from everybody on this panel is like, if you can get off on the right foot and build some social capital and make sure people are aligned, then, you can have those breaks in between where you're not face to face. I see Danny's back. David, anything to add on this kind of culture tips and things that maybe you're doing with your company before we hit it over to Danny for the Q&A?
Sure. I think, one thing that's really important is everybody has to be very clear on what they're supposed to be doing. So we use the EOS model, and it's really helpful because it gives you a format for breaking down exactly who's supposed to be doing what and by when. So there's no ambiguity. There's no, dog ate my homework kind of moments, because everybody knows exactly what success looks like and what they have to do to achieve success. And so that's really good. And then just on some of the culture stuff, we get together once a year for about 4 days or so. But in between, we do things like Get to Know You Friday, where somebody on the team can throw out a question, and then everybody on the team can give their take on it or respond to the question the person put out there. We also do team happy hours, which works much better when everybody's in a similar time zone. You don't want to be the guy in the morning when everybody's in happy hour in the afternoon. But that's all I would say on those points.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, welcome.
I'd really love, yeah. Let's jump into these audience questions. We only have about 10 minutes here, so we got to work quickly. Okay. And I'm going to point each specific question for a specific individual, if that works for everyone. And you know what? It's one of the perks of the job. I'm going to ask my question first, okay? This is for Dave Williams. The reality of the next few decades as a global society is we really need to focus on decreasing emissions to almost zero, right? How can nomads travel without it being detrimental to the climate?
Yeah, well, I think slow travel is one good way. So I think at the moment we're seeing that touristic travel is very, very unsustainable. And that's coming off this whole pandemic. We just see a lot of these different places just decimated. So I think what you're going to see with the new nomad movement is when people travel, it's like the traditional nomads here. They're going to a place and they're typically staying there for several months at a time. So the faster you travel, the more detrimental it is to the environment. I think also by joining organizations like Nomads Giving Back, for example, get involving yourself in skill shares, staying in more local communities. Don't stay in the touristic areas, because when you stay in the touristic areas, it's a lot of these cities are just being decimated by Airbnb, for example. So really pick out the vendors that you work with, make sure they've got some sustainability initiatives. They're doing things to support the local communities. I think these are all things that people are going to be looking for. Some people, some aren't paying as much attention to it at the moment, but I think as we go forward, this is really going to be at the top of minds for most people, especially following the pandemic, where everyone saw the benefits of not driving to work every day and the benefits that had on the environment and all the benefits that we're getting. So I think people are much more conscious of this, especially the younger generations too. They're really oriented around this, and they're and there are a lot of them are vegetarians, not eating meat, just things like that.
It's just a small piece of the puzzle, and unfortunately, global emissions only dropped 4% in 2020. So there's a lot more at work. And, I think the digital nomad mindset is one that's oriented around being mindful of, of some of those challenges. Here's one that Rachel, I want to ask you this question because I think it's become indicative of your company in some ways, especially with Forrest, your CEO, traveling. It's from Musul. How are you dealing with the challenge of time management? Digital nomads working more, working less. Your CEO is a newfound digital nomad, right? Like, how have you guys balanced that time management?
Yeah, I forget, someone on the panel talked about those rituals that the old world of going to the office created. And, that just like even changing your costume, I'm wearing my work clothes and now I'm putting on my at-home clothes. And I think the thing that we've really encouraged our team to do is figure out when you're the most productive and optimize your day around that. And then develop some rituals, like it's end of day, I'm gonna go for a walk around the block or whatever it is. With Voodle, it's short video. We do a lot of this culture sharing using our own platform, and it's just like, hey, I'm reclaiming my commute. Someone started that stream and everybody was like showing how they were going for a walk or taking their dog to the park or whatever as a way to reclaim their commute time. So I think the rituals are probably the most important thing around time management. The other thing that we have is just kind of collaboration hours. So we're all in the US at this point, but we work across all the time zones. So Pacific from 9 to 2 is really when all the meetings occur. And that gives the East Coast people in the morning, their morning time for deeper work, and the West Coast time that's more the afternoon. But I think that's helped as well. So there's not that creep where it's like suddenly the day is actually 12 hours long because people are online at different times. And I think global would make it even, more difficult. So I think it's rituals and being clear about what those are. Like, it's really important to be there on the kickoff meeting Monday morning. It's important to be at the rep meeting on Friday. Otherwise, work your day out. We always do cultural things on Wednesdays. So we have these little kind of moments throughout the week for connection, and then try to leave as much time for deep work as well.
Well, knowing your organization and the direction it's headed, I think you'll have to solve some of those international challenges before too long. I wouldn't be too surprised. This question actually comes from the aforementioned Gonzalo Hall. I'll ask you this, Sam. What places around the world do you see becoming a nomad hotspot in the future? Where are the hidden gems? I mean, your organization thought about this as much as anyone, right? You said you were in that room figuring out the next city, right? What do you think are the hidden gems?
Well, I'll start by saying I think the countries and cities themselves have a lot of control over that. I mean, there are so many places that are trying to pull remote workers toward their countries and their cities to spend time there right now. I mean, we all know some obvious examples of that, but I think, we've always tried to actually create that at the places we go, to try to create some excitement to host these remote workers and to host not just remote year, but other remote workers as well who are coming into the market. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what plays different places make. But yeah, I mean, like you said, we're basically in the business of finding those places. All over Southeast Asia, there are tons of places from the major cities, Vietnam, like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. Bangkok is actually a really amazing place to spend time, even though it's a giant city. The obvious ones over there, Chiang Mai and Bali. One of the places we always loved going, actually, in Europe, a lesser known place was Slovenia. Anytime anyone ever asks me on travel advice in Europe on a place they haven't been yet, I usually recommend Slovenia. It's just a beautiful country with incredible people and also really good Wi-Fi. There's endless amounts of places that are amazing, but I think, again, they will have their own opportunities to make their mark.
David, we've only got about, I need an answer from you that's about 60 seconds long, okay? Everybody's thinking about the travel environment when this pandemic is over. One of the things I'm thinking about, and this is paraphrasing another question from Gonzalo, is the tax environment. I mean, if you think flights are going to be jammed, you have to think about the way that global taxation is going to change. How are you preparing for this? How are you thinking about it? And I know that could be its own panel, but you've only got a minute.
Well, there's a lot going on there. So the IRS has trailers filled with mail that they haven't opened since the pandemic started. So, there's going to be a big backlog of stuff going on there. Globally, I think things are going to have to change as people start being able to work remotely all the time from anywhere. If you're working as a U.S. citizen, you have to file taxes in the U.S. But if you're doing it from Spain, Spain's going to want a slice of that action. And right now, it's generally a 183-day period that you have to be there before you're a tax resident. But I could see that starting to shrink in the future as people are traveling more and they're doing 2 or 3 month stints in places. Countries are going to want a slice of that action.
That's so interesting because we always think about keeping an eye on the visas, right? But we need to keep an eye on the taxations. Well, guys, we can agree on one thing, right? Digital Nomad is not dead. It really is a complete relaunch of Digital Nomad about to happen. And for all of your businesses and for all of you as thought leaders, I mean, the second half of this year and certainly into 2022, buckle up your seatbelts, right? It's going to be fascinating.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks to all of you for joining us here. It was an absolute pleasure. David, Dave, Sam, and Rachel. Digital Nomad is certainly not dead, and we have 4 of the most interesting minds in the business. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Danny.